Alrighty, we're continuing to think about what's the key to effective mission in our churches, and we've thought there's two big things: healthy church ecosystem, which we looked at a couple of days ago, and yesterday and today we're particularly thinking about having a mission purpose or a mission dimension which is injecting key things into the ecosystem. If you turn up to page 4, I think it is in your booklets, you'll see page 5. You can see these are the 10 key principles we believe need to be injected into church to have a healthy mission ecosystem flourishing. So you can see the 4 headings there we looked at yesterday, and under that 10 principles, and they all start with a C. Isn't that awesome? And today we're going to be looking at working with outsiders. That's the heading we're looking under, and the 3 principles that sit under that. Now, we would have loved to at this conference look at working to reach the world. Absolutely critical to think about how we reach Australia and have partnerships with people in Australia and across the world. And it's critical for our churches. We just can't do everything. So today, working with outsiders. I was at the team pastoring conference on Tuesday, I think it was, and I heard he say something profound that I've heard him say before, which is we need to set our vision by the fields and not the barns. We need to set our vision by the fields and not the barns, which is don't let your vision for the gospel be constrained by those who are already in the barn, by the size of your church, by the size of your buildings. Rather, what we need is to let our vision be shaped by looking out at the fields of the lost all around us. How many people we are saving each year in our churches, whatever that might be, is not enough. Is not enough. We need to save more and more and more. And so this session is particularly dedicated to that. If you turn with me to page 13, you'll see there's a funnel diagram. Sam briefly introduced it yesterday, but I want to spend a little bit more time there, because what the funnel diagram does is it pulls together those 3 key principles of working with outsiders: contact multiplication, connect to Christians and Christianity, and conversion engine development. Now, I think the funnel is a particularly helpful tool for 4 key reasons. The first is it's an evocative image. So that was really helpful. Sam yesterday talking about when he used to drop the coins in the funnel at charity funnels at the shops, and the coin would spin around and spin around and spin around, and just before it got to the bottom he'd grab it again and put it in again. Non-Christians, outsiders, do need to circle around Christian things a number of times and come closer and closer to Christians and Christianity and Christian worldview and Christian thoughts, and then come to investigate things even more closely in something like an evangelistic course. And then they become a Christian and they need to get followed up and established in the faith and established into church life. And it actually takes a long time, but people do need to be funneled through those processes. Sometimes it's faster, but usually it takes a fair amount of time. Second reason I think the funnel is particularly helpful is it identifies that there's actually 3 distinct sections, 3 separate principles at work as we're seeking to work with outsiders. I think what often happens for pastors, because mainly we haven't set aside someone who's able to particularly focus on the mission purpose area of church, when we think about reaching outsiders, it all becomes a bit muddled together and a bit confused, and we're not sure exactly which bits are which. What I think the funnel does and the 3 principles do is help us recognise actually there's 3 parts to this, 3 pieces that fit together, and then it becomes a diagnostic tool. What we can actually do is we can work out, where are we weak? Are we weak in contact multiplication? Are we weak in connecting non-Christians to Christians and Christianity? Or are we weak in converting people and then establishing them in the faith? Or are we weak everywhere? But at least we can have a diagnostic tool. And what I'd love to see coming out of Reach Australia is for each one of these principles, wouldn't it be great if we had a 1-page tool for every principle that helped us then do some diagnosis in each of our churches and work out, where are we weak, where can we improve, where can we move forward? And I'd love to see that for us, for our church. We need to be doing that sort of thing regularly. And so that's the second reason. Third reason I think the funnel is particularly helpful is it reminds us that we're trying to move people. Contact, you see the arrows down the side, contact, connect, conversion. as we're working through the processes of the funnel and as we're doing the people work that is in and beside and behind the funnel, we're actually trying to move non-Christians, firstly meeting them, contacting them, and then helping them to connect to Christians and Christianity, and then actually helping to bring them conversion and then into the life of the church, which is, I think, is the four key strength of this funnel diagram, is that it shows there's an end goal. The end goal is glory and the honour of Christ, but an end goal, the end of the funnel, is that people are actually established in the life of the church, which means they're part of the church gathering. They're coming to church each week. They belong. This is their family. And you can see that represented by the box down the bottom. What we really want is after people are converted, they're being established in the faith through the follow-up. At some point through there, we want them to recognise the importance of being part of the family of God, gathered each week, and so become part of the church community and gathering with us. Now, sometimes it happens earlier, which is why we've got the dotted line. It's often that people, before they're converted, become part of the church community and come each week, and so we wanted to represent that there. The other thing it'll mean is once people are converted and established in the faith, we want them to come into the life of the church, often through a membership course, and into the life of small groups, and into the life of ministry, and into the life of serving, becoming members of the church who are contributing and serving and growing and established Christians. And you can see the arrow on the side, on mission. All on mission together, reaching out, seeking to save others. And the wonderful thing that we find is often new Christians who are filled with passion, who are filled with zeal, who don't have lots of the bad habits of Christians, and who have all these new networks of non-Christian friends are some of the most effective contactors and connectors and inviters and people who give an answer for the hope that they have in Jesus. So we want to fuel and foster that. So that's the funnel. I'm happy for any feedback. We can always keep improving these things, but I think it really helps us to see clearly what we're seeking to do. Now let's look at the first key principle in more detail, the very top of the funnel, which is contact multiplication. In creating a healthy church ecosystem, this is a really key principle, and I think it's an overlooked principle. Either it's limited to churches saying from up the front, invite your friends along to this event, or it's equated in people's minds with, well, we're putting on this event, of course non-Christians are going to turn up, we're going to meet a whole bunch of new non-Christians because we're putting on an event. But that's not actually contacting non-Christians, it's just expecting them to turn up to something that we're putting on. Contact multiplication is the very top of the funnel, and it's trying to warmly contact as many people as possible in order to then bring them closer to the things of Christ and to Christian people. So it's actually contacting new people, building new relationships that we don't already have. And because it's the very top of the funnel, it represents the largest number possible, the widest bit. We're trying to flood the top of the funnel with as many people as possible. Because under normal circumstances, apart from the extraordinary work of God, and can I say, pray for the extraordinary work of God that He would bring revival in our land. But apart from that, what we see is that generally the amount of people you get in the top of the funnel, for each step, the percentages decrease massively. So you contact a huge amount of people. A small percentage of those people are actually going to come to events where they connect with Christians and Christianity. A small amount of those people are actually going to come to your conversion engine, to your evangelistic course. A small amount of those people are going to come to your follow-out course. A small amount of those people are going to actually be converted and established in the life of faith. So under normal circumstances, we've got to flood the top of the funnel so there's actually enough people coming through that at the bottom of the funnel there's a large number of people getting converted and coming through. Now God can do what He wants. He's absolutely sovereign. But that's under normal circumstances. And so if you contact 30 non-Christians this year as a church, the result you're going to have at the end of the year of converts who are established in the faith is going to be very, very different than if you contacted 1,000 non-Christians this year as a church. And so we need to flood as much as possible the top of the funnel. Now, 4 key ways to multiply contacts. 1, personal contact by church members. Now, I think this is the obvious place we go, and probably because it is the most important. People have contacts, make contacts all around them, and those tend to be the warmest contacts because they're contacts that are made in the context of real relationship. And so our job, particularly if we're championing the maturity purpose, is to keep helping people be intentional about that and make those new relationships and build those new relationships so that those people might be drawn close to the things of Christ. 3 ways that we can help. One is help people be intentional. People will often say, I don't know anyone that I could invite along to this event. I don't know anyone who really doesn't know Jesus. And what they mean by that is, in the early days of their faith, they went around, they worked really hard trying to get their family and their close friends to follow Jesus, and maybe one of them did, and they're so thankful. But the rest they've worked hard with and they're not interested anymore. And so now they feel like, I've got no one. But actually, they sit next to someone at work and they go to the gym with a bunch of people they know and they play with a sporting team and their kids are in a sporting team who have parents when they go to school. You get it. There's all sorts of contacts they have. What they mean is, I can only really start to move people towards Christian things if I'm a really good mate with them. What we need to keep helping people see and remind ourselves is there's people everywhere who need Jesus. And we don't need to be the best of friends with them. And we actually need to start building new relationships and intentionally making new relationships with people all over the place. Now, some people are far more gifted at this than others, and we need to encourage and foster those amongst us whose gift is contact multiplication. They just keep making friends and keep making friends. And if we can help them to connect their friends to Christians and Christianity, it's a powerful thing. Another part of that helps us to be intentional is prayer. So prayer is powerful and effective. We need to be praying for non-Christians that they might be saved. But if we can keep prayer for specific non-Christians on the agenda, what it does is it keeps our people intentional. So we remind people from the front and in social media and in different places. But what we can also do is if we can set up a system that keeps reminding people to pray for non-Christian friends, it's very powerful. We do something very simple. We call it 311. We try to encourage everyone to identify 3 non-Christian friends or contacts, people they know, pray for them once a week for 1 minute. And that's a pretty low bar, isn't it? 3 friends once a week, 1 minute. You might want to go 222 or change it up, whatever you want to do. But what we then do is in the daily reading notes, which is our daily Bible reading materials, which we encourage each Christian to do, unless they've got another plan, they're encouraged to write those 3 friends. And so every day when they open their Bible to read, they've got those 3 friends to pray for, or at least once a week if they're doing 311. The other thing we do is once they're in growth groups, we encourage growth groups each to have a mission rep who encourages prayer and makes prayer happen for our overseas mission partners and Australian mission partners, but who also encourages us to pray for each other's 311 contacts, our non-Christian friends. And so we're praying, but we're also reminding each other to be intentional, build relationships, identify people who we could share the gospel with or invite to things, which is a very powerful thing to do. We also sometimes even draw up the quadrant thing. I think it comes from everyday evangelism, probably from a number of tools. Just the quadrants of life: work, uni, school, leisure, sport, friends, family. Just write in one person in each quadrant who you know, maybe 2 people, maybe 3 people. So they have an intentional, I want to think of that person as a contact, as someone I can build a relationship with and warmly then seek to move to the next step of the funnel. Simple things. Second thing that's helpful for our people is to help them see themselves as local missionaries, which is just building on the first. But if you went somewhere as a missionary, you're thinking very intentionally. You touch down, every decision you make is shaped by the mission. Where we're going to live, what sort of house, what sort of suburb, where our kids go to school, whether we join a knitting group or a soccer club or learn a new activity. It's all for the purpose of connecting with new people that they might hear the gospel and be saved. It's not just about close friends and family, because there aren't any. It's actually about meeting new people and seeking to help them be saved. The more we can think like that, and it's easy not to, isn't it? We get into the run of life and life becomes about doing life and looking after kids and making things happen and not drowning. And all our people are living that life as well. And so the more we can keep conviction forming, the more we can keep lifting their vision so that they say, no, we're hometown missionaries. We're local missionaries doing this intentional work. Third, helping our people to stop thinking of themselves as solo missionaries. Too often we paint the picture that real evangelism is done when you're on your own out there, and often we are on our own out there. But the more that we can then work with other Christians and connect our friends to other Christians, the more powerful it is. Now, Sam's going to talk about that more, but that's a very powerful thing, particularly in a society where more and more Christians know to stick their head up is a frightening thing because you're going to get shot at. If a conversation about God comes up, Christians tend to be a bit scared. And so the more that we can work as a team, we're actually a mission team together, the more powerful that is. And that's where a lot of our connection sort of stuff comes in together. Second big way we can multiply contact. So that was the first, personal contact by church members. And I think we've probably thought about that a fair bit. Can I say I reckon the next three categories, by and large, churches have thought about a great deal less. Second key category is community awareness. I think we have this sense that real, authentic, and morally superior contact multiplication is always done through grassroots relationships. So it's number one. But if someone comes to church and is saved because they saw a post on social media, or someone comes to church because they are walking down the beach and someone on Summerfest, our summer program, walked up and gave them a postcard and they came to church and got saved, and someone else got saved because they sat down one-to-one with someone and were walked all the way into the truth of the gospel, I sort of partially don't care. I'm just stoked that those people are all saved. Whatever we can do that helps people be connected so then they can be moved towards the things of Christ and might be saved, as long as it's moral and good and biblically right, is fantastic. And if you look at the top of the funnel, remember, we've got to flood the top of the funnel. And I think number one is just actually not going to cut it on its own. We're just not going to personally contact enough people through our church members. And so we need other things to be doing simultaneously, which reach people we wouldn't have otherwise reached, touch and contact people we wouldn't have otherwise contacted through other means. But also, as we do those things, it actually assists and fuels our church members' ability to do the personal contacts more broadly and more effectively. So what's in this number two category, this community awareness? Well, in my mind, it's things like marketing, social media, street signage. Now, you might think, marketing, that just sounds crass and worldly, doesn't it? No, I don't like the word marketing. But if I think of it as we have such an incredible thing to share, the gospel, the changed lives it brings, the community of hope, the community of joy, don't we want to let people know that there is this thing where they can come and they can hear and they can find it? Then I'm into marketing, if that's what marketing is. I want to let people know. We have this incredible thing and we want to make it available to others as best as possible. Now, these sort of areas, I think, are often thinking a little bit outside the box sort of areas. And I think as churches, we tend to think a bit more traditionally and inside the box. Now, we've always got to bring our theological minds to bear, avoid error and compromise. But if the mission purpose, the people set aside to think mission, are able to draw alongside those who live and work in these worlds, then we can bring a great deal of expertise to bear. Now, let me give you a few examples. Letterbox drop. Old school, but pretty cool. If you drop, well, we find when we drop 10,000 leaflets or postcards, we like postcards because they look pretty nice and smick. When you drop 10,000 postcards, what we find is we will get 2 new contacts to church on average. That's awesome. But you know what also happens when you drop 10,000 postcards? The whole community knows you exist. The whole community has heard something about you, and if the advertising is good and it speaks of who you are and the sort of message you have and the sort of community, that's a very powerful thing in people's minds. And if you do it reasonably regularly, now you don't want to do it so regularly it's like not only white noise, it's like you're spamming me, stop doing it. If you do it reasonably regularly, it starts to create a sense of, yeah, that's the place you go to find those answers. A sense of the church's presence and who they are, and it's a very powerful thing. And if you tie with that, actually, let's get all the members of church to be the ones who actually deliver the stuff. It starts to build in them conviction and a culture of mission amongst us. Simple, powerful. Social media. I think it's a very underutilised area. I think it's something we as a church need to really work on. But more and more people live in the world of social media as they live in the real world. And young people particularly are digital natives. And so I think one of the things that we can increasingly work hard at is letting people experience our church prior to coming here. Experience our church prior to coming here by experiencing something of it online through social media. The power of social media is it creates you in the online space. Now you can create a fake you who looks much better than the real you, but that's lying, so we don't want to do that. We want to create a real us as a church. And so as people engage with us through social media, which they do because it pings off all our people into their stuff, realms, what happens is they get a sense of who we are. The vibrant, hope-filled community who has such a wonderful and life-changing message. Now, the power is heaps in stories and real-life things. And it's not in smick advertising and really quality. It's actually just seeing, wow, that's what church looks like. Look at those people. It's funny moments. It's not taking ourselves too seriously. It's someone sharing the life-changing story. It's moments filled with emotion. It's stuff that you capture on your phone and post regularly. And it actually demystifies church for the outsider because they get a glimpse of it before they come. But what it also does is says, we've got something so incredible here. Why don't you come and check it out? Now, it's not the silver bullet, but you just add that as another piece to all the other pieces, and it's actually a powerful piece. Again, the mission purpose can start thinking, how do we get crew who are in that world, who think like that, working like that? Now, that's a fair job because you've got to be around all the time, getting content. You've got to be the sort of person that people want to be filmed by. Targeted social media advertising, social engine stuff. Why is it that some things pop up to the top of Google? Why is it that when I've been searching stuff, different advertisements come up that I was searching before? Well, sometimes actually I was just talking to someone else about it in conversation and Google heard me somehow. What's going on there? Now, people who live in those worlds actually know how to do stuff so that your church can be advertised more effectively to people who are interested in those things. People who've searched New Church Central Coast, you can find out who's done that and actually target some helpful information towards those people so that they can see what's going on. Whole area to think about and look into. Blog advertising. We had a big Carols event over summer. One of the things we did was we thought it'd be good to spend a couple of $100 paying a local lady who runs a blog for profit. What she does is she writes a blog for young mums who with kids and basically says, these are all the great things going on. Why don't you check some of these out? And then she pumps it out through all of her social media outlets. So there's young mums all over the coast who are tapped into this particular lady. But what you can do is you can say to her, pay her, give her a bit of a brief, she'll adjust it and put it in her own words, and then she'll pump it out through all her social media. And so all the young mums on the coast hear, oh, you know what's going on this weekend? EV, community carols, going to be awesome. I'm going along. A whole bunch of young mums, previously uncontacted, turn up to our event. Fantastic. We've never done this. Gifts to new people in the area. Tell me if you've done it. But imagine, there'd be a way, wouldn't there, to find out all the new people who've turned up to your area and a way to systematise it so you've got a team who goes around and drops a gift over to their house once they've been there for 3 months, and it has a little card in from your church with your website on it and a little personalised note on the back, something like that. A whole bunch of new contacts, very warm. Street signage, your online, a whole bunch of things to maximise the way that we build awareness of our church in drip, drip, drip ways. Now you hear this and you think, oh man, that costs a lot of money. that it costs a lot of time, that I don't know how we do it. You don't need to do all that. But it's worth having in mind because there may be one thing you can do. There may be something you can start small and then add a little bit. And yes, some of these things do take some money, and it is worth putting some money into it, while recognising there's all sorts of other things we need to put money into, and so you've got to apportion well. Third, contact events. Sam spoke about this yesterday. He's going to speak about connecting events, particularly next, but sometimes you want to set up events that are actually designed to contact new people, to have totally people who've never been contacted by the church before to turn up to these events. And so thinking into what could we run that would be really attractive to the non-Christian outsider, that they'd come along and be contacted by the church for the first time. And then we can work at connecting them in, meeting with Christians. And often the same event that's a contact event is a connect event as well. So you can run one event that does two things, but it does take a little bit of clear thinking. Two examples. One, carols. Lots of churches run carols. And so what we find is still the non-Christian world is interested in coming to carols and will come along, and there's great opportunities to contact people we would have not have otherwise contacted. But you need to advertise it in a good way. And when they come along, it's important to then try to work out, well, how do we either move them to the next step in your calendar flow or actually meet them so that we can help them personally to the next step. Church is another big one. Church continues to be a place where week by week non-Christians just turn up. Now, it grows as that. It grows as a front door. The more there is awareness of your church and the larger the church is, but it is a reality. Some people just turn up because they need some help, they're hungry, that sort of thing, and we want to help. But other people turn up because they think, I'm missing something. I need something spiritual, and I think church must be the place, and they turn up. Now, that's a wonderful new way to make new contacts. And so again, thinking about how we run church that's effective and accessible to outsiders. Fourth, community presence and reputation. Now, this one may be number 2, just in a disguised form. I haven't worked out whether there should only be 3 categories. But there is something about, as your people are personally contacting people and they're in the community and they're part of the netball clubs and they're part of the social fabric of community, and awareness is growing because you've got an online presence and a social media, and there's letterbox drops going on, and as there's contact events that get advertised, and every time people are coming in contact with church in some sort of way, whether it's online or face-to-face or meeting Christians, or there's a presence and reputation being built, a name being built in the community. And over time, you want it to be a name that speaks of truth and of solidity and of hope, and whatever it might be, a name that speaks of the wonder of the gospel. And people think, yeah, if I have questions, that's where I'm going. I know what that place is, a brand, if you like. Now, a couple of thoughts here. We chatted about door knocking a couple of days ago. What we've found, regular positive door knocking is a powerful thing in building reputation and relationship with the church. We don't do it heaps often, but in summer we do one big batch of it over 4 days with a whole bunch of people. And what happens is we contact a whole bunch of massive area of our church community. And what happens is we try to do it in a way that's positive, that's warm, but that's keen to go deeper if people want to go deeper, and if they don't, we're happy to leave. Now, you do that year after year, and what it creates is a reputation and a relationship. Even if it's not the same person who goes back year after year, it creates a relationship with the church, a trust of the church, a knowledge that that's the place where I would go if I want to find out and pursue these things further. I might stop there, but as you can see, there's a number of ways where we can multiply our contacts. 1, 2, 3, 4. Let me hand over to Sam.
Thank you, Grahame. So some of the stuff that I'll be talking about today will also overlap with some of the things Graham's already begun to talk about, and also with the workshops. So if you came along to the mission workshops, bear with us. There's a little bit of repetition here today. I want us to start up thinking about why it's worth allocating time to the next step in that funnel. Okay, connecting people with Christians and with Christianity. Historically, I don't think we've put a lot of time into this, and we often talk about living in a post-Christian culture and the fact that many of our people in society don't know one Christian, let alone many Christians. But I'm not sure we've actually started to act on this yet. Why haven't we acted on it? Well, maybe there's a couple of reasons. Maybe we're not quite sure yet whether it's worth our time and our resources because, well, we're word people. We want to be teaching people the Bible, and so wherever possible, we want to have a full expositional talk that explains the entirety of the gospel. Maybe that's it. Or maybe we believe that this should kind of happen naturally or organically. So people, if they're mature in Christ, and if they're talking to people about the things of God, then of course they're going to invite that person over to their house for a barbecue and introduce them to some other people around their church. Of course that's what you do, right? But the reality is, most people in our church are not natural evangelists, and we need to keep helping them, as Grahame was talking about, to think intentionally about the connections they have. So why think into connecting people to Christians and Christianity? We need to teach people, as Grahame was saying, to be intentional. Our people have hundreds of unchurched contacts. Hundreds of them. Friends and neighbours, parents of their kids' friends, workmates, sporting clubs, the whole bit. But here's the thing. I think that most people run their lives in a series of little silos. And you see this at a wedding. You know, when you go to a wedding, whenever you go to a wedding and you get seated at your table, there's the Christian table, and then there's the work friends table, and then there's the family table, and then there's the odd friends table that don't really fit anywhere. And if you do finger food, right? My wife and I did this. We thought, it'd be great to get people mingling. But if you do finger food, they just kind of naturally gravitate in those directions anyway and form their own little groups and tables. And the reason for that is people don't get up at that point and go and talk to other people around the room. And the reason for that is because they've never met outside of that context. Because we don't do a great job of mixing our worlds. We don't do a great job of letting our non-Christian friends know who our Christian friends are. And so people need to be taught to be intentional with the connections that they have and begin to mix their worlds. Second thing is plausibility. People in Australia don't think it's reasonable or rational to believe in a virgin birth. That's a crazy thing to believe. A crucified Saviour, a resurrection, the ascension of Jesus into heaven, and the active living lordship of Jesus today. Those are some pretty far out things to believe, right? And so when we go and talk about these things with people, alarm bells start to ring in their head. And it sounds like that we're talking about fairy godmothers and unicorns, and it's simply implausible to them. And so if you have a really keen evangelist who goes out and they join the soccer team, and they've joined that team in order to meet unbelievers and to share the gospel with them, then that is really hard work on your own. If you're the only one in the room who believes these weird ideas, it's very easy for people to kind of just write you off. But as people meet more and more Christians who all believe the same thing and hopefully begin to enjoy spending time with those people as well, then under God, the gospel has the potential to move from something that is completely implausible to be something that the outsider might consider thinking about some more. The third reason we want to do it is we want to make space for loads and loads of conversations. These events that I'll talk about in a moment or two need to make space for these conversations to take place. Think about your own conversion for a moment. How many conversations about Jesus did it take for you to get over the line, so to speak? For me, I tried Christianity on and off, I think probably maybe 10, 12, 15 times during my high school years until eventually, the year after high school, I worked out the Lordship of Jesus. People need loads and loads of conversations and connections in order for them to talk through and work through and to think through what the gospel might look like in their life, to put it into action and to see how it applies in other people's lives. And in order for that to happen, they need that time and space. And so just as we need places where people can explore the gospel in great detail and invite them to commit their lives to Jesus, I think we also need events that create space for relationships and conversations to develop naturally. So what we want to do is to build into our mission plan opportunities for people to make easy invitations to events that are specifically designed to help them to connect with other Christians and begin to connect with the Christian worldview. As you can see on the diagram, I think if we can go back to the funnel diagram for a moment, we've got a bit of a sliding scale there happening. So we've got the one across the bottom and the one up and down. And so there's a sliding scale there of things that you could call, that you can consider in that connect to Christians and Christianity space. There's a non-relational to relational scale, and then there's light gospel content to a high gospel content. So an example of a non-relational task might be something like door knocking, for example, or walk up. It was really great to hear the story of Carl's last night about UNSW and all the street talk that they're doing at the moment. If you're looking to engage with strangers about the gospel, then it's high gospel content, but non-relational. But it is still a way of connecting people with Christians and with Christianity. And I want to say door knocking or walk-up doesn't always have to be high gospel content. During our kids' mission program, like the Summerfest program they run here at EV as well, we start the week fairly light gospel content when we go out and do door knocking and walk-up. And really, it's just an invitation. We start the week mostly because people are pretty nervous about the idea of walk-up and door knocking, and so we want to train them in that throughout the week. They start pretty nervous, and so we say, just make an invitation. We just want you to go out and invite people along to the Wave Kids Club, find out if they've got kids and whether they'd like to come to that, or they themselves might come along and join us for a coffee that morning. So it's non-relational, but light gospel content. And then towards the end of the week, we're actually looking for them to have opportunities to explain the gospel further and deeper. A relational task would be putting on a fairly social event that people can invite their contacts along to. And they will vary in terms of the gospel content that you include. So for us, I think we've got a slide of movers and groovers. There we go. So movers and groovers is kind of like our little music group that some of the mums at our church run. They make lots and lots of contacts, and it's very light gospel content. Really the only gospel content they have is at Easter and at Christmas time. But there are mums there constantly working intentionally to get to know people and invite them along to the next thing. And that next thing is then advertised at various times throughout the year at the Movers and Groovers event. So things like Easter church or Mother's Day church or carols and Christmas church and our Wave Kids Club program in January as well. Another event that we run, we've just started running this one. Not the next slide, please. Yep, our sourdough masterclass, okay? So we teach people the art of making sourdough. I don't know anything about this, but there's some people in church who know how to do this. And the guy who runs it kind of talks tongue-in-cheek about being a really authentic person and talks about the authenticity of Jesus. It's not high gospel content. It's still pretty light gospel content. But he talks about the Christian worldview in that process while he's making bread and while he's explaining how to do all this thing with yeast and whatnot. And then there's an invitation that's made to the Life series. And we see quite a lot of people come along to that and then make that next step into our Life series. Another event that's actually happening this Saturday night is a live music event with food and fire pits. People bring their mates, they get to meet a whole bunch of Christians. There's live music put on by people around church. And they sing songs that they've written about God. And so one or two of them throughout the night will just explain the meaning behind the song that they've written and why they think that's important. And that's really as much gospel content as we have in those events. But it's a great time just to connect with various people who are interested in live music and interested in coming along to that. At the Wave Kids Club in January, we have a coffee tent as well as the kids program. And that for us is a connection event as well. But it's a place where we fairly explicitly talk about the Christian worldview and we speak about the gospel throughout the course of the week. And loads of conversations about Jesus at the tables. We have a little evangelism team that goes into the coffee tent, and their role there is to engage people in conversations about Jesus. But again, at all of these events, there is lots and lots of space for people to do that connection with Christians, to have deep conversations about life and the things of Jesus. But the event is not the goal in and of itself. The goal is to move people the next step along, to move people to a place where they might be willing to consider the things of Christ more. Some key things to remember if you're going to put on some of these events. Whenever you run one of these events, you really have to make sure you nail it. Every time you pull off a bad event, as Adrian was talking about yesterday, you damage your ability to drag people into the next event that you run. So you really have to do it well. It needs to be, so what I would say to that is do it less and do it well. Don't do lots and do them badly. Do it less and do it well. It needs to be accessible and attractive to your people. Okay, I'm not interested in sourdough making, but there are people within our church who are interested in sourdough making. So if that's their thing, then they should run that thing that they think they'll be able to bring their friends along to. It's not about what I like doing, but it's what the people and our contacts enjoy doing. It needs to be something that facilitates conversation and mixing of people. One of the big aims of these events is to give exposure to community, to Christian community. And so you need to factor that into your planning. So if you're going to put on something like maybe you want to watch the State of Origin together, then you want to think carefully about how you're going to manufacture the environment so that conversation can take place before and at halftime and after the event as well. Rather than everybody sitting down, watching TV, and then up and go and leave. That's not community at that point. And you want to avoid the old bait and switch. The quickest way to lose trust in your event is put on the Christmas wreath making night and then tack on the end a 15-minute gospel talk that you didn't say was going to be in it when you advertise the event. It's really tempting to kind of do that because you want to make the most of the opportunity. There's all these people here. But you'll actually end up doing more harm than good at that point. And the last thing to say is these can't stand alone. These are not standalone activities. They're not really worth running without good structures and follow-up in place. And so these events are not the first thing to put into your calendar. You need to first consider your core conversion engine that Graham's going to talk about in a moment. You need to get that up and humming first. Because if that's not up and humming, then all these people that you make these connections with have nowhere to go as their next step. I'm going to hand back to Grahame. Away you
go. What you can't do is just run all this. So you've got to work out, what are we going to do? You've got to think intentionally about what contact stuff are we going to run, what connection stuff are we going to run, what's going to be most effective, and what are we running and isn't effective and doesn't have a real goal that we either need to reshape or kill so that we can start new stuff. Now, all that takes change management, and it's not easy. The other thing to pay attention to is you can design a funnel for all of church, but you may actually be seeking to reach more than one group. So you may actually need to design a couple of funnels that then stick together on top of each other. But again, you can't just do everything because you've only got so much time, energy, relational time with all your people. Last area, conversion engine development, is pretty key and critical. And we see it's been made up of two pieces, which is your evangelistic course and your follow-up. Now, heaps of churches have these, and that's fantastic. And we think you need both. So even though they're two pieces, they're really two parts of the one whole, particularly because these days people have so little familiarity with Christian things. It generally takes a long time for people to get converted, to investigate that. Now, people can be converted instantly. The Lord is powerful. But generally, to investigate the truths of Christianity, to come to a sense that the Bible is reliable, to see that the worldview makes sense, to consider what it means to follow Jesus and the cost of that, and then to make that decision, follow him, come to repentance and faith, and then be established in the faith, tends to be a long process. And we tend to see, we run a 6-week course, we tend to see some people get converted in those 6 weeks, but many don't. That they're keen to kick on into the follow-up, and we roll in follow-up, firstly a 6-week follow-up, followed by another 6 and another 6 and another 6 and another 6. We roll it on for a good 6 months, and it's often in those 6 months that the people are converted, not in those first 6 weeks of the evangelistic course. And so I think that just shows, at least in our context, that it takes a considerable amount of time for people to be converted firmly. And then, after that, once they are, it takes a considerable amount of time for them to be established in the faith so that they have assurance of faith, understand the key truths of Scripture and the basics of what it means to live the Christian life, so that they can be part of the church community in a really helpful and healthy way and continue to grow. And so we really do try to move people through this funnel. People get converted in church under the preaching of the word. People get converted as a Christian shares the gospel with a non-Christian one-to-one. We still would encourage those people to come to our evangelistic course and to do the follow-up. Now, you've got to be flexible. People are people. But we do that because we still want to make sure that they are clear on the gospel. There's pieces they won't have, and they need to lock those in place. And we want to see them firmly established in the faith, and we believe it actually takes a long period of time. And so we do intentionally funnel people through our conversion engine. Now, engine, that can sound like pretty, I don't know, not the sort of language you generally use for these sort of things, but engines do heavy lifting. Engines make things, drive things forward, and that's what we want to see and have seen our conversion engine doing. It does the heavy lifting of evangelism. It does the driving forward in seeing more people converted than we would have otherwise seen people converted. Let me give you 4 reasons. 1, conversion engines are specifically designed for the purpose of evangelizing non-Christians and establishing them in the faith. You can design something that is totally accessible and culturally able for people to come to as much as is possible. And you can design something that's specifically designed to give them everything they need theologically, biblically, so that they can investigate the truths of Jesus in the Bible and come to the faith. So it's purpose-built. Second, because it allows non-Christians and new Christians the time they need. Sam was saying we need a lot of time around conversations. We also need a lot of time in this phase where people are investigating the truths of Jesus. And as I've said before, you can create something that's a long process and actually gives them the time they need to consider these things fully and the implications for their life. 3, because it uses the gifts of God's people, which brings different areas of expertise. So rather than a one-size-fits-all, let's just train our people, tell them to evangelize, send them out, and you do it all out there, drawing it together actually harnesses the gifts of all God's people so we can build something bigger but with also different areas of expertise. The person who's great at speaking can speak at the event if you run that sort of model. An MC can MC really well. The person who's good at just chatting and making people feel welcome, sound person can do that, food people can do that, vibe, the person who can run follow-up in a small group. Everyone can bring their gifts to bear, and you can have scores of people across church involved in this one thing, all harnessed together, being effective in making Christians, bringing people to conversion. This approach, we feel, is far more effective. And over time what happens is each of those people who takes a piece and uses their gifts, a team can form around and under them, and then you get scale. You can actually slowly build the size of it and reach more people. 4th, because of the momentum you get when all of church is on board. When all of church is mobilised to support your conversion engine, you get synergies you otherwise wouldn't have had. People know it's on. People are inviting to it. People are serving at it. People are praying for it. And over time, this just creates an energy around it where people think, man, if I had any friend who wasn't a Christian, I want to get him to that because it's awesome and it rocks. And I've been to it and I've seen it in action. So it's that confidence building function. And so over time, people do invite their non-Christian friends, and the critical mass slowly creeps up, slowly creeps up, slowly creeps up. So you're less and less worried about there not being enough people there and not enough non-Christians there. And it just slowly, over time, can gain momentum, prayerfully, asking the Lord, over time gain momentum. Especially if, over time, we intentionally work to, well, let's just try to scale it up. Let's just try to build a little bit bigger over time and reach more people with it. Now, how do you develop a conversion engine? And it's more than running an evangelistic course, I think. It's thinking about all the components, from when it's going to be on, planning for it, how are you going to inform people and advertise and talk to them about it, invite and help our friends to invite their people to invite their friends, how it feels when they get there and how it's going to be led and how the people are followed up afterwards and all those sort of things. Now, what are you going to run? Again, understand your context. Our contexts are all different. How long is it going to be? 10 to 12 weeks, I think in most contexts in Australia is a big ask. But man, you can get through a lot of great stuff in 10 to 12 weeks. But 4 to 6 weeks as the start is, we think, a bit of a sweet spot, at least in our context where we are. And especially if you can invite someone to just come and check it out the first night. And if you love it, kick on. It runs for 6 weeks. And then at the end of the 6 weeks, and by the way, we've got follow-up, and that runs for 6 weeks. And actually, it runs forever. You'll never get out, 6 weeks. And then when you look at the material, you need to consider, what are we going to use? Are we going to use something that someone else put together? There's a number of wonderful, fantastic courses. Introducing God, Christianity Explored, Christianity Explained, Investigating Jesus, a whole bunch of wonderful things that can be used. And you might choose to use one of those or take one of those and adjust pieces of it or write your own. But you've got to keep thinking, what's my context and how can we reach the people there? Because if you're in a context where everyone believes in God, but they actually all believe in different gods, it's going to be quite a different context than in other places where actually most people here don't believe in God, or there's actually a real mix of apathy and I sort of believe in God, but not the personal transcendent. And how are you going to start? Often it's good to start, we've found, at least in our context, with something that connects to people and the cries of their heart. And there tends to be a general human cry everywhere of, what am I here for? What will really make me happy? What will satisfy? Those sort of things, starting where people are at, but moving quickly to show them actually there is real truth and hope and beauty in the Lord Jesus and the gospel. And we found following that with something about the reliability and historical nature of the Bible is very powerful. Not necessarily because it's a real blockage to the gospel and people, but people just don't have the confidence that the Bible is actually reliable. They think either it's just a made-up book of fairy tales or it's a doctored version of history. So helping to reshape that worldview early is a very powerful thing. And then you'll need to make decisions about your course material according to context, but also according to the gospel. You just want to make sure that all the key gospel truths are clearly explained, particularly if you're going to call people to response. They want to know what they're responding to and have all the facts. And so you'll be dealing with things like creation and God's rule and our sin and rebellion, the judgment to come, Jesus' death to deal with sin and wrath, his resurrection from the dead, what it will be like to repent and turn your life over to Jesus. What does it mean that he's the Lord of everything? And so if these things aren't clearly spelt out, they'll become a stumbling block for people later on. And towards the end of the course, I think it's highly appropriate to call for some sort of response or some sort of feedback. We found second last week a great week to ask people, we do it in written form, how did you find the course? Give us some feedback. Where are you at with these things? Where are you at with Jesus? So find that sort of stuff. And do you want to kick on? Do a bit of follow-up and gives us a bit of time to get organised for that. But then how are you going to run the course? If it's going to be a course, what size is it going to be? Is it going to be small in a lounge room, sitting around? Is it going to be slightly larger, couple of tables, cafe style? Can we do something bigger? And what sort of size is it going to be? And therefore, what sort of venue and what sort of style is it going to be? And how do we make it accessible and attractive for a non-Christian to come in a non-threatening environment and investigate the truths of Christianity? And then how are we going to advertise it? How are we going to put together stuff that makes it for the non-Christian reasonably attractive? Think, yeah, I'd come to that, but also for the Christian to feel confident I could invite. I could give that postcard and I could say these words and my friend just might come along with me. And then we start to think about, well, what happens if no non-Christians turn up? Because we actually can't control that, and non-Christians won't tell you whether they're actually going to turn up to the last minute, and actually people cancel at the last minute, so what are we going to do? Well, I'm probably going to need some Christians there as well as non-Christians. What's the good ratio? What's the good mix? We've found 50-50 to be pretty good, particularly on the first night, and then non-Christians drops off a bit. But again, you're trying to work out size-wise, what sort of event we're going to do so that we have a critical mass of people and it doesn't feel weird in the space and the setup that we've designed. But also, what's the ratio of Christian to non-Christian we're going to want? But also, how many times a year are we going to run it so that we have a critical mass at each event and a good ratio at each event, but also so that there's momentum through the year? Because if you run it regularly, it feels like, yeah, we've got a conversion engine always cranking, always a place to invite non-Christians to, always people being followed up. It builds a momentum and a confidence and an excitement around those things. But you've got those three things working together so that you have to juggle to decide how often, how large, what sort of makeup. Now, what are some other things to consider when running an evangelistic course? I said that. How many times a year? What size? Secondly, what things are you going to do to make the event warm and accessible to inquirers? Now, we've chatted a bit about this in the culture shaping section for church, but you can even go harder in this context because it's specifically for non-Christians. What are you going to do food-wise? Food warms things up when you're getting together. You want to do that at these sort of events. Is it dessert? Is it dinner? Is it morning tea? Food is a great context for relationships. A full dinner, wow, big wins in that. Wow, hard to pull off. So you can work out whether you can do that. Background music helps heaps in those sort of contexts, fills the awkward silences. We've found tables are really good. When you're sitting around at a table, it forms relationships, it's good for discussion, it's a good context for this sort of thing. The setting is really important. Can you make it a familiar style place? Maybe you actually go off-site. You go somewhere where it's comfortable for the non-Christian to be, because that's going to be most accessible. Maybe you come on-site. There's wins in that, having non-Christians come here and for this to be becoming familiar. But if you do that, you want to set it up in a way that's not too weird, but is more comfortable. We find a cafe style is particularly helpful. And then you think into music, food. Do we have coffee? Do we have tables? How do we set the tables up? What does the MC say? What is lighting? All those sort of things. Table leaders. So once you get beyond a small group, you might have two little mini groups of 4 or 4 groups of 4, whatever it might be. You realise we need more than just the leader. I need a couple of leaders. How are we going to train them? What are they going to do? What's going to be their function? What we don't want is for them to swamp the non-Christian and say so much stuff it's not helpful for the non-Christian. Rather, what we've found is particularly helpful is to be the person who makes their experience warm and accessible and helps them navigate their way at the event and get all their questions answered. They're also the people, these table leaders, who shut down the dumb things that Christians do. So Christians turn up to these events and do all sorts of weird and crazy stuff. They put their hand up and ask about predestination. They speak with weird jargon. They're just weird. They just do weird stuff. And they get so excited there's a non-Christian here, they've never seen one of those, that they're like, man, yes, we've got to convert them. So just stuff starts coming out of their mouth. It's so intense, the non-Christians feeling like. And so the table leaders are playing interference, sort of you're trying trying to make things feel as non-weird as possible and help this person navigate getting your questions answered and your thoughts clarified and hear what's going on. Now, the leader can do that in a smaller context. Question time, again, you've got to work out how are you going to manage that is most helpful for people. Interviews. We found interviews to be extremely helpful. If you can get someone who was converted 2 years prior in that evangelistic course or in the follow-up afterwards, and you get them up and they can share in a really real way how it felt coming along, what it was like going through the course, what they had to think through, what it started to mean for their relationships, the cost it was to follow Jesus, and actually how wonderful it is and the life change it's brought. Man, that's a powerful thing for people to see. That could be me 2 years down the track. Very, very helpful, very powerful. And behind all this conversion engine, and behind, in fact, the whole funnel, it's good to remember there's people work going on. We're not just running events. We're not just sticking things on. There's actual relationships and conversations. And so if there's a way where you've set aside a mission person or a mission team, volunteer or paid, and they're thinking and working with your people so that, how do we keep track of non-Christians in our church? How do we keep making sure there are conversations with those non-Christians, talking to them about Jesus, inviting them to the evangelism course, inviting them along to the follow-up course, organising that they can sit down and have coffee with someone and get their questions answered? Or who brought friends to the Christianity, the course, the evangelistic course, but then they stopped coming week 3? Who's going to ring the Christian and chat to them about how to continue the conversation with their non-Christian friend and coach them through how they can keep their non-Christian friend interested and maybe get them to a future course or maybe direct them to read a book, or maybe who's going to do that? And when someone says, I want to do follow-up, who's going to follow them up to make sure they get in follow-up? And when they're in follow-up, who's going to make sure they continue along coming to follow-up? And it's all relational, it's all people, it's all woven in and through everything, and we need to pay careful attention to that. I want to show you now a brief video, 5 minutes. It's Sam and Toby Neal from Vine. 2 different contexts. Sam, Hunter Bible Church, larger context. Toby, Vine, Surrey Hills, smaller than Hunter. Here's 2 guys chatting about how they set up evangelistic courses. So have a bit of a look at this.
G'day. We're going to spend some time talking about evangelistic courses. We've got Toby Neal with us from Vine Church in Surrey Hills, and we've got Sam Hilton with us from Hunter Bible Church. Gentlemen.
Great to be here.
We start off, Toby, what material do you use as you run evangelistic courses at Vine Church?
So Christianity Explored 7-week course, which many people find, really long, and they're like, how can you get someone to 7 weeks? But we find if they come for the first week, we simply say, if you enjoy it, come back. If you don't, no pressure. We find that 80% of the people who start finish, and those who don't usually don't come back week 2 or 3. So we don't have an issue with 7 weeks. And Christianity Explored, it's run by Rico Tice. It's a series of videos. He's very warm, clear on the gospel, but friendly. Goes through the Gospel of Mark, so we're using Mark's Gospel to evangelize people. We find it really helpful.
Yep. Sam, you use something different?
Yeah, we use the Life series that we've adapted to a 5-week series. We kind of start a little bit further back than perhaps Christianity Explored does. We start with the existential question, how can I be happy? And then the goal from that is really, that's the big hook for the series. And that's the week where we want to say, come back and find out what the purpose and meaning of life really is. From there, we roll into a night that's on the Bible reliability, and then we just explain different aspects of the gospel. So sin, the cross, resurrection. But we actually use Christianity Explored as a follow-up series.
Okay.
So we want to take people from the Life series into Christianity Explored, where they get the gospel again, but in a very different format.
Now, we've been thinking about going to that, and I think the reason we haven't yet is it's a little bit more resource heavy,
more resource heavy.
starting
Yep.
with some talks and that kind of thing. But we'd love to get to there
Yeah.
at some point.
Can you talk to us about how your night runs? What do you do when you get there, and how do you structure it?
Yeah, so 7 till 9:15 for us. We start with dinner and then move to the questions that they've had as they're reading the Bible at home. So Christianity Explored, we challenge people, make your own mind up about who Jesus is, look at the earliest biography of Jesus. So they go home and are reading sections of that, and I say, bring any question. And so we start with dinner, then go to the questions, and that's usually the best time of the night.
Do they do that reading beforehand?
About 60-70% of
Okay.
people would do it. They get so much more out of it if they do it. And then we usually do, depending on what the topic is, so on the night we're talking about sin, I bring in some quotes, one from Francis Spufford, another from Martin Luther King, and just trying to get them thinking about the topic of sin before we then go to the Bible. So the course material has kind of a small Bible study, and so we do the small Bible study, break for dessert, tea and coffee, and then watch the video, and then finish up with some questions, reflection questions, wherever they really want to go.
Okay.
Yeah.
Sam?
Yeah, so we start with meet and greet time, where you can get tea, coffee. We have people coming around and taking people's orders for coffee and things like that. Then at about, so that starts at 7:30, about 7:45, we kind of usher people to their seats, and from there they're given an introduction question that gets them talking about the topic for the evening. And then after that I get up and usually give a 20 to 30 minute talk depending on the night and where we're up to in the series. And after that they're given a couple more discussion questions which they're free not to use. So at the tables, often by that point there's enough questions and objections that conversation goes in very different directions at different tables.
Who's directing that conversation at the tables?
We have what we call life table leaders, and their job is really just to ask questions and not have all the answers. We don't put a lot of pressure on them to know all the answers or know exactly how to answer all the defeated beliefs. But the helpful thing about the way we set up the course is they can then push those questions to question time, which is the last part of the evening.
Yep.
So I get up again and answer questions that people might have.
People stick their hand up from the audience and say,
We used to do that, but we found that it was actually quite intimidating for visitors to do that. And so now we have our MC go around and she'll actually take people's questions down by going just from table to table.
yeah. So where, Toby, yours is a slightly smaller group. There's not multiple tables, so in that small group, people feel a bit more comfortable to ask questions generally?
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
We've been having dinner, we've been laughing together, and yeah, they do. And one of the things we do is we make sure that there's only one person on the table who is answering the questions. And one of the challenges we've had is when Christians come and join us, either they brought a friend or they're helping out, sometimes they can feel responsible for defending Christianity.
Yeah.
And sometimes, you know, we've got 3 or 4 people on a table of 8, and as soon as the non-believer feels like there's all these Christians trying to gang up on them, it's really bad. So we say, you're not allowed to answer any questions. You can ask questions, but there's only one person defending and, you know, 7 people asking questions.
Yeah.
And we find that's really, really important.
Yep.
Yeah.
So you got a bit of a flavour for that there. That's from the Church in the Box mission course. I did that earlier in the year. It's fantastic. It's worth jumping on and doing that. Now that's the final principle, and we think these principles are particularly helpful, scalable. So you work at your church size, but you can see how drawing all those principles together, the 10 principles, and we're thinking, how does the mission purpose shape and influence and fuel and champion mission across all of church? Absolutely critical, but only if it's working in a whole church ecosystem that's running in a particularly healthy manner. So we need to pay attention to all the parts. Now, as we come to the end of that, you might feel like at conferences you think, oh, I came really thirsty, and then they just turned the fire hose on, and you know, just so much information. It's worth going away and digesting and just thinking about what will this mean for us? What is 1 or 2 steps forward? Or it might mean overhaul. I'm looking forward to going away and doing that myself, going particularly through the principles and diagnosing where are we weak, where could we improve, where do we need to step forward. But also the thing I'm really excited about is continuing to work together on this, continue to help each other, continuing to develop together so that together we might reach Australia. And so I'm really looking forward to getting into things like some of the resources that Reach has, online training, group training, consultations, and next year's conference. So that's for me the next steps forward. And I think Scott's going to jump up now and share thinking about what is next step for us.
Can we give Grahame a massive clap? Grahame and a bunch of others have been thinking into this for us over the last 6 months, and he's done an incredible amount of work for us over the last few days as well with Sam and Adrian. Graham's right, there's a lot to take in, and so I do want us to sort of land this section. I want you to keep those booklets out and have that funnel diagram out, and with your teams, with each other, just want you to do one thing. What we do in the consult process is we do a thing called a gap analysis, and we think into each of those stages, and we work out where are we needing more resource, where are we needing more effort, what are we doing really well in some places, what aren't we doing. So I want you to do that in a moment, but also want to give you a little bit of a plan for heading back away from the conference. We often come out of these conferences wanting to do lots. Can I encourage you to think about what you might do just in this next year? So here's a helpful diagram that we use as well. What can you do to go away and start creating mission heat in your church? How can you get a culture and huge yesterday to be doing in your church? How can we start building that mission heat through our preaching? Start forming that coalition. There were lots of calendars with lots of colours and lots of busyness. HBC is a large church. They've built momentum over the last 10 years. They've slowly done that. They haven't just done it overnight. So in your second year, what's maybe one thing you can add, to your calendar or start doing? And just do the one thing. Less is often best. Do it well, evaluate, maybe think about doing it again. And then in the third year, start to build that pipeline and review. We're not going to reach Australia in the next 2 weeks. It's going to be 10 years. And it's going to be deep work. So that's something just to help you as you go away. But for now, reflect on the funnel. What are your key gaps? We'll come back in a moment.